nothing broken on that end.
We're recording. Just a test.
Hello. Welcome to my garage. Hi everyone, Ryan from CarParts.com. Today we're working on a 2012 Ford Transit Connect. We're doing a front end refresh. What that entails is replacing control arms, wheel hubs, tie rod ends, as well as shock absorbers. So, front end refresh, everything's going to be within the wheel well here. That's where most of the work's going to happen. We actually have to go into the engine bay shortly just to remove some nuts in there, but all the work's going to be done in here. The control arms are down here, tie rods are down here, shocks down here. So you want to make sure that you jack up your car correctly, make sure you've got jack stands underneath the vehicle, and the first step to getting started is removing the wheels. So once you've taken off the wheel, you can see all the different parts we're going to work on, and there's also some parts that you can check while you're down here. This is a good chance to check your rotors and make sure that they're not scored or marked or anything, make sure there's no lip on the edge there. It's also a good chance to check your brake pads and make sure they're the right thickness. The parts we're replacing today will be the strut assembly or shock assembly. We also have these tie rod ends, and the control arm is down here as well, and the wheel hub is located behind the brake disc here. So we need to remove the brake assembly right here to get access to everything else behind there. So the first thing that we did, and this is on this particular car, this is where they are. There are 15 size bolts back here that we've removed, and this whole assembly should be able to come off. Most vehicles have 2 bolts right here, so it's universally that's not too crazy to think that most cars have those 2 bolts there. And once you remove this whole caliper will come off, and then we can also take off the brake disc, and then we have access to everything else behind there. When you remove the calipers, it's going to want to fall down, and the problem with that is that you're connected to your brake line still. You don't want to detach that because you do a full brake bleed after that. So I'd recommend is maybe taking zip ties or some way of securing it so it won't fall down and yank on your brake lines, because you have to replace those and they'll start leaking. So I'd recommend using zip ties or metal zip ties or some way of just making sure the caliper doesn't fall and cause further damage. So now we have this secured. This is the rotor. In most cases you can pull them off, but in some vehicles it'll have a small either Torx or Phillips head screw in there. Be very careful with those, because if you strip those out you're going to have a lot more problems. So you want to take very, very close care to not strip those out. That's very, very important that you have that. But in most cases it should pull right off like that, and then you have access to most of your items behind there. So this is the wheel hub, as we can see here. This is a ABS sensor or brake sensor. Here's the tie rod end. And this is the McPherson strut assembly that we have that we're going to replace as well. Control arm down here on the bottom. So we're going to show the bolts we have to remove to get the pieces out. So there's a piece underneath here for the control arm, another bolt back there, 2 more bolts over there. There's a bolt up top we need to remove, tie rod end, and then also there's 3 bolts up top that we need to go into the engine bay to remove, and this whole assembly should come out at once. So we went ahead and removed all these different bolts that we pointed at earlier, and there's some on the control arm back there. They're removed. The only thing holding this whole assembly in are the 3 bolts above, the axle, and ball joints. So next we're going to get a ball joint separator and walk through how to use one of those, because these are purely held in by tension. You'll see these nuts are completely loosened off, but it's still being held in there. It's because they're tapered at the end and it's holding onto the metal, but by design. So there's a special tool that we use for called a ball joint separator. We're also going to remove the axle nut here as well, those 3 nuts up top, and this whole knuckle assembly should come out, and then the control arm should be separate from that but also come out, and we can start replacing everything within the wheel well. So we left this overnight to soak. This large axle nut here, we had to go pick up a 32 millimeter to take this axle nut off. Another good thing is that if you're going to take a break overnight and you have some larger nuts to take off, it's good to use some kind of penetrator. I prefer PB Blaster, but WD-40 or any kind of rust penetrant or whatever it might be to loosen these up. So I threw some of that on there, so that should take the axle nut a little bit easier. The next thing we're going to detail, and I'm going to show more later on, but I'll show is removing these ball joints because they're the tapers. I want to do a kind of a detailed, like a close-up shot of what ball joints are and why they're difficult to remove. But there's a couple different tools you can use for them, including this pickle fork, they're sometimes called, or ball joint separator. I mean, there's a lot of different names for these things. And at the end of the day, having a large Thor hammer like this is best for some of these ball joints like this where they have a large knuckle that you can wrap on it. Hitting it on the side like that actually will loosen it up and let the ball joint come out completely like that. And then the only thing you need to combat is that you have a nut that goes on here, and this ball joint is free spinning, so you have to grab into this somehow. But using an impact gun like this is usually the best way to take those off without having that spin too much. But I'll detail ball joints and the intricacies of dealing with those later on. But the next step we're going to do is we're going to remove this 32 millimeter, remove the shock and strut, and then the whole knuckle assembly should come off. Sometimes removing these axle nuts can be difficult. What we end up having to do is we put the rotor back on and then put the brakes on, and then my beautiful assistant helped me by holding down the brakes for us. We broke it loose using this and a breaker bar. It's best if you use a large impact on here to back it off with an impact gun, and you don't have to do any of that. You can just do it raw like this. But another technique would be just to, when you have the brakes or even if the vehicle's on the ground, it's a little bit more dangerous. But you can apply pressure with this, a large leverage, and then break it off that way. The next step for us is we're going to push this inwards. There's a couple ways of doing that. So this is the half shaft. Is that one way that's popular? As long as you have a new nut, a new castle nut like this, is you can actually hit this head on here and make sure you're hitting the nut, not the axle, and it should push it all the way through. That's where this penetrant oil should come in handy again, is helping with that, the removal of that. The other way that if you have pneumatics available, so they have like a little gun that basically punches it out and pushes it all the way out. It is relatively difficult to do, but as long as you don't damage the half shaft, we're replacing everything else around here, so it's not a big deal if you start damaging those other pieces. You just got to protect this half shaft here. And then from there, we're going to be separating all these different ball joints one by one, and then the whole assembly should come out and we can start the replacement process. So what you see here is this is we call dead blow mallet. So there's two different mallets here. So this one will cause any kind of chaos and destruction anytime you hit metal. This is good for releasing those ball joints like we were talking about earlier. And the problem with this is that sometimes it'll bounce. So when you hit something like that, it tends to bounce back and not impart all of its energy. Now this is a dead blow and it's filled with BBs. And you can hear that going back and forth. And what that means is that when you hit the object, it stops dead. It won't bounce off the object. It basically stops there and imparts all of its energy on there. I like using these on metal that you're kind of worried about because it's got at least a little bit softer blow to it, but it still imparts all the energy and allows you to hit out objects like that. You can see the axle, the half shaft is all the way out now from the knuckle. So we have our control arm right here, our knuckle assembly with our wheel hub in here. Everything, you can see the bolts are removed all the way around there. And we decided to not separate these two because we're replacing these two pieces anyways. Most of the time you have to separate this because this is a ball joint and you would either press out the hub, but we're doing a full knuckle assembly today. But everything's going to drop back in, so we're going to go in here, inspect, take out some more pieces like the tie rods and tie rod ends, drop down the strut assembly, and then we can start doing our replacement with our new parts. So now to remove the strut assembly, it's just these three nuts on top here that we have to remove. And just keep in mind that when you drop this, there's nothing else holding it on, so it's always good to have my other hand here underneath the car holding up the strut assembly. Don't want to drop it on your foot. Now it should all just slide out like that, and we have the full strut assembly.